I was in London in our investors' offices with my CFO and CRO and Chief Customer Officer, and we'd come together to talk about something completely different. And after our Chief Customer Officer left to fly home, our CFO just said to the other two of us, he said, "Can I show you something I've been working on?" And he had coded a new CPQ module, so sort of cost a proposal and quotation module that we could use, which really brought a number of different things together and would save every salesperson at Phrase an hour for every quote that we would put out. Because when you go through all of the approvals processes and you have to navigate the different systems in Salesforce, in Ironclad, in ChargeBee, put it all together, there was a tremendous amount of administrative overhead, and he had coded this. So he then flew home, and my CRO and I sat there and looked at each other and felt utterly inadequate.
I'm Felicia Shakiba, and this is LeaderbookAI, where we solve a business challenge in every episode. 6 weeks ago, my guest, a non-technical CEO, wrote his first line of code and hasn't slept properly since. 200,000 lines committed, 8 apps built, and his AI running while he sleeps. Georg L., CEO of Phrase, is here to tell you exactly what it feels like when the ground shifts under your feet as a senior leader, and why the gap between executives who are in it and those still watching from the sidelines is about to become impossible to close. Georg, take me back to the moment you realized you were behind. What happened?
Yeah, no, it was super clear. And first, thank you for inviting me to participate in the discussion. I'm really looking forward to it. I was in London in our investors' offices with my CFO and CRO and Chief Customer Officer, and we'd come together to talk about something completely different. And after our Chief Customer Officer left to fly home, our CFO just said to the other two of us, he said, "Can I show you something I've been working on?" And he had coded a new CPQ module, so sort of cost a proposal and quotation module that we could use, which really brought a number of different things together and would save every salesperson at Phrase an hour for every quote that we would put out. Because when you go through all of the approvals processes and you have to navigate the different systems in Salesforce, in Ironclad, in ChargeBee, put it all together, there was a tremendous amount of administrative overhead, and he had coded this. So he then flew home, and my CRO and I sat there and looked at each other and felt utterly inadequate. We felt so deflated, like, what has just happened? We are, the CFO is 10 years younger than I am. My CRO is some years older than I am, and I'm obviously in the middle. And the two of us just felt like this young chap, we know he's smart, right? He's super smart, but wow, we felt left behind. So that was the moment of a sort of peak inadequacy, which spurred me to download Claude that evening. And then it began.
Okay, so tell me more about how you got started, because I think that a lot of executives have the similar experience that you have had with your CFO, but they're not exactly sure how to get started or what that even looks like or how to integrate that in their workflow. So how did you begin?
So I've actually, I think my journey with this is one that by now everyone at Phrase has started to go through, and certainly my whole executive team have been through that moment of feeling inadequate, of feeling like left behind, of kind of like really unsure. And it's a very emotional feeling. And this is actually quite an interesting thing that I've seen in speaking to executives across a whole range of companies in the last few weeks. I don't think that executives who've been exposed to AI have ever felt quite as emotional of a roller coaster as they are at the moment. So it starts with that sort of, what do I do? So I download Claude, and here's this very simple advice I'm trying to give to as many people as I can. The very first thing I did, I could pull it up in my Claude history, right, is help me set up my preferences. Just ask it how to use it, right? And then, like, what is a project? What is co-work? What is a skill? What is an artifact? What are these things? Like, I don't know. And a couple of weeks later, I was sitting down with someone in our company, and this person was asking me, "How have you done so much?" And I was like, "I haven't. All I've done is ask questions. I still don't understand half of what I'm doing, but I'm just asking questions." And so I then had I think I might have asked it like, "What should I do with you?" And it said something like, "Why don't you ask me to summarize your inbox or summarize your calendar, like the basics, right?" And then I just said, "Look, I kind of have this idea, and since we're sat here, about building an app that would help us to explain to customers the business value of some of the things that we do for them. That would be quite useful. How should I start?" And it asked me some questions, and I answered them. And it said it was sort of validating the idea. And then I was like, okay, so if I wanted to turn this into a project, what would be an infrastructure? I've heard of Lovable. I've heard of that. Like, is that useful? Should I use that? Are there other things that I should use? And it brought up some options. And I said, oh, well, help me choose between them. So it broke it down, and I chose something else, as it happens, Replit. And like it, it just carried on like that. So then I was like, give me a prompt to put into Replits. And I'll just copy paste. And that was the first week. And then it just evolved from there. But it was just curiosity and questions. And not, you see, what I've definitely seen in myself and others is this sort of fear of the unknown. So, you know, I'll sort of pause to let you ask some questions in a moment.
No, no, I'm
Like,
listening. I'm on the edge of my seat here.
well, so, there was a moment, right, which was someone said to me, "Have you used Claude Code?" And I said, "No, no, no, that's not for me. I'm not up to that. All right, it's not my background. I've worked next to and alongside and closely with product managers and engineers for most of my career, but I have not been one. I have not written code before. I mean, I think I might have learned some easy basic or something when I was 15, and there will be lots of people on this call who have no idea what that is. But like, I mean, I got to a Hello World and that was about it. So, so I thought Claude Code's not for me. But then someone said, you really got to try it. So I was like slightly, with some trepidation, I went to that little slider on the top of Claude, just past co-work to that forbidden ground and then clicked and to see what would happen. And started to just ask it the same questions like, how does this work? What should I do with you? And then I found myself starting to copy paste things into terminal instead of into Replit. And the language became even more hard to understand. Like I didn't actually know what, grep that. Now I start to understand what some of it is, but only a few weeks later, it's just pattern recognition. But mostly I was just copy pasting, but suddenly things started to get built. And then, I read a lot on Twitter and LinkedIn. For me, the enormous unlock was finding Gary Tan's G Stack, he calls it. So suddenly I have a GitHub account and I know what GitHub is. And so I found his GitHub account and it says, copy and paste this into Claude to install it. Fine, do that. See how much I'm just copying and pasting, right? Do that. And then suddenly you've got almost these digital people, right? So for the other people who were like me 6 weeks ago, who think this sounds sort of crazy, like the metaphor suddenly with this G Stack thing is it's like you've got a senior engineer, a senior designer, a peer CEO, someone from Y Combinator, in your Claude code stack. So you just do backslash office hours, and it's like having someone from Y Combinator question you, like, why do you want to build this? Who is it for? And those kinds of things. And you just work through a project methodically with like an expert in your pocket each time. And then before you know it, you've built software, which is in itself brilliant, but it's not actually the real reason why I'm doing any of this. But that's been my journey. And that's why I'm up at 2:00 in the morning this morning, writing code, and have been doing a lot of that. I've been traveling a bit, planes with Wi-Fi are now brilliant. Suddenly, instead of filling the time on the move, it's more fun writing the code because you can build something, which is wonderful. I'll say this last thing. One of the nicest things I've experienced over the last few weeks has been sharing my enthusiasm for building things and having the engineers say, "Isn't it great?" And you can see them light up, and it's like it's a shared experience, which is fantastic.
So I think what you are going through is what a lot of executives are thinking. I mean, not just executives, but just people, non-technical individuals, right? But what are you building? Like, are you building something that can improve efficiency internally? Are you building products for new product lines for your customers? Like, what is the most important thing that you're building right now?
So I should say, I think there's a big difference between being able to build a prototype or a piece of internal software and then building something that scales to the needs of customers. So just being very, clear about that. I haven't got delusions of grandeur yet. So any of my customers that are listening to this can be reassured that I'm not touching our production code. Um, but it doesn't mean that I couldn't actually build ideas. And that is something that I'm doing. So I'll say there's two things. I can give you specific examples of bits of software that I'm building. And some of those have been interesting and fun and potentially even useful. What I'm actually building, though, is a muscle and a new set of skills and knowledge about what is possible. I feel that's the main reason I'm doing it. I want to deeply understand what is actually possible, what my expectations can and shouldn't be of people. I want to set an example, of course, as well. Um, but also start to reimagine what the future of running a company looks like given the capabilities of these systems today. And that's actually what I'm building, is that muscle. So I mean, in terms of software, I've done things like rebuilt kind of a learning management system that anyone in the company, so anyone can use it in the company. You can put in any topic. It knows who you are. You can adjust to your learning style and the level and the amount of time you've got, and it will produce a curriculum and produce the content, produce the tests, and it's all, the whole thing evolves to your needs, and it will ask you smart questions about why do you want to learn that, and is it in this direction or that direction. And so that was interesting, and took about 8 hours elapsed time, 10 hours maybe. I built a news center for the company. I've built a quotation tool for salespeople. I've built, obviously, everyone does like diary management and stuff like that first, so things like that. We do an all hands every week at the company. So one of the little jobs to be done each week is to find content. So, you know, built a Slack agent that goes out and looks at everything that's happening in the hidden recesses of the company and has a bunch of criteria and scoring, and then surfaces them and says, this might be a good candidate, and then writes the Slack message to that person that says, hey, would you like to come and, just takes a bunch of time out. So all that sort of stuff. The business value piece, that was fun. That actually, I then handed that off to someone who then took it to another level, which is phenomenal. So you can build a persona of the customer, and drop in a bunch of context, and then it will come up with the talking points, the objections, the objection handling. Start to build a business case, and then you can. And it's just very good. The results are very good. So all of that stuff. But the really interesting thing is this muscle. So I'm trying to think about what an agentic workforce or an agentified company looks like, and what agentic processes look like, what the role of humans are in those, and where and when, and how to build a system that is evolutionary on several levels. You've got the agents themselves, and those prompts need to evolve. You've got the harness across the top, and that needs to evolve. And you've got the human involvement, and that, and the whole thing needs to be kind of recursive at multiple levels. That's like, for a person that's never written anything before but likes to think in systems, it's quite fun. And what I'm absolutely convinced of is I'm going to spend the next few months getting it wrong, but it will be slightly less wrong. And then when it will suddenly start to be useful, it'll be not very useful, and then suddenly very useful. And I think that's the journey.
I I think you said something really profound, which was just you're not building products or, or actually systems necessarily, but you are building the muscle to lead, essentially. Because if you're not a tech company today, you likely will be very soon. And I think with that being said, not all executives know how to be tech leaders. And to actually understand how to lead tech functions and departments and know what they're capable of. I mean, you have all of that knowledge because you're practicing with it on a daily basis. And you're understanding, like you said, what's possible, what's not, how fast can I push my team? What can I expect? What is the output? How fast can they put this together? And you are instantly in that experience. And I think that's that is the like golden nugget, I think, that you've shared.
think I think that what I'd really love, I've enjoyed the path I've taken through this, but what I'd really love people to be inspired to do is find their own path, but start. And if you listen to Jensen Huang from NVIDIA, just interviewed this week on the All In podcast, and he was very interesting on there. He said a couple of things that really stuck with me. One was, if I have a $500,000 engineer and at the end of the year, the performance review process happens and she has only spent $5,000 on tokens, like that's bad. That $500,000 engineer should be spending a half of their salary, $250,000 on tokens. That's quite interesting. And then he said a bunch of very interesting things, AI prolific and everywhere. So the point is, it's not just for tech companies or tech leaders. It is obviously a technology, but actually there's something much more profound there, which is it's about how to run any business is fundamentally changed when you have essentially a digital human, a digital coworker. We call them, I don't know, we're still working on the names, but like my marketing leader calls them teammates, right? Agentic teammates. And you have to think about them differently. You tell them what to do and they will do it sometimes. Or you give them rules and they'll obey them mostly. And that is very human. Like, it's not like software. I wrote one personally for sort of a family use. And I told it certain things it should never do. And it went and did them. And then I said, stop doing that. And it apologized and said, I'll never do that again. And then it did it again. And that is human. Actually, it's like slightly irresponsible, slightly drunk human. And that is quite profound. So you can start as a non-tech person, non-tech leader, absolutely lean into this technology if you start to think about it as a highly capable but rather immature human coworker, but one that if you train it will become extremely proficient and then scale horizontally very fast. And so I really think that the processes of running companies of all types will be profoundly changed this year, and then again and more so next year, and again and more so the year after that.
What are leaders maybe not talking about publicly, but behind closed doors? What are you hearing from other leaders and executives that they're really only sharing with you?
So you go to CEO dinners, and the first thing is in those moments, it's quite fun being a CEO. I spent most of my career when I wasn't being a CEO, desperately trying to meet CEOs, and CEOs desperately do everything they can to avoid meeting salespeople, and but they will meet other CEOs. So I spend time with my competitors, for example, right? Because that whole trope about it's a lonely job is just quite true. And so you do get often, not always, but you do get some honesty in those rooms. So I'll share a few things. One is I talked about the emotional roller coaster, and CEOs and CFOs and like C-level people are absolutely all going on that roller coaster. I was actually speaking to a person that works in my company, so not a C-level person, but he described the same thing this morning. He said, on the same day, I can feel like I've got a superpower, and then someone will show me what they've done, and I'll feel totally inadequate, and then I'll leapfrog again. So I think the emotional roller coaster is there because we're all individually and collectively, and then for our companies, having to figure out completely new ways of doing things. And so the uncertainty is higher than it has ever been before. And we see that reflected in markets. We see that in investor sentiment. We see it in employee sentiment. We see it everywhere. Uncertainty is pervasive, and that is very uncomfortable. I think I have a higher threshold for it than most people. I enjoy it, but you have to work with a lot of people and stakeholders where that isn't how they've done business before, right? Investors and markets have typically wanted to know what the annual plan is and maybe what is the 5-year outlook. And, that's harder and harder to sort of do. So that's interesting. So I think that's leading to a lot of kind of emotion and uncertainty and these kinds of feelings in those around those tables. I think what people are also starting to talk about is that companies themselves are going to have to look very different, and what are the implications of that, and figuring that out, and what is the time frame, and what is the size and shape of a business, in the future. And that is something people are absolutely talking about, and they don't know the answers yet, and they're trying to figure it out.
You brought up size and shape, and I think that this is really key because the lines are blurring. And, keep me honest here. The lines are blurring between engineering and research. Now it's executive dash engineer, right? And people are upskilling faster when it comes to coding or leveraging technology. Where do you think organizational design goes? Is the future of organizations like super flat where everyone or most people have the same title and you're bringing more people on board to grow? What does the future of the organization really look like?
I think that is the question. I think it's a great question, and I think you should keep asking it because the answers will change and evolve, from me and from others. And it's some of it is a bit like every technological cycle where or technology cycle where new jobs emerge, right? Jobs that we couldn't have imagined, and that will definitely be the case here. So, what does it look like? I think, first of all, I see exactly what you're describing. I had a product manager say to me a few weeks ago, well, with these new tools, it's now possible for me to step on the toes of engineering. And should I be doing that? And I was like, yes. And by the way, they will step on yours too. So, there's this kind of full stack. Everybody's more full stack, right? I think that is true. I think there's also the difference that I alluded to earlier between the sort of prototype and the scaler. So I think of that as like the builder and the scaler. So you can build something, but someone else has to, it's one thing to be a great chef that can cook a beautiful meal for 10 covers or 50 covers. It's another to feed the 5,000 or the 50,000, right? And you need different infrastructure for that. And the same thing, if you're building an artisanal car, that's one thing. But if you're building a factory now, because the robots might be more involved in the factory, so the factories themselves are going to look very, very different.
Yeah.
Uh, like um, everything's getting roboticized and agentified, but you still need a factory to produce 10 million units a year. So I think full stack everything. I think there's probably also what we call a polarity at our company, which is quite interesting. So one, as in two things both being true but pulling in opposite directions. One of those is that I believe in giving everyone access to these tools and seeing what they can do. So we're rolling out Claude to everyone in the company, and training and an accountability that comes with that expenditure to do something with it. But we need to give everyone the opportunity. And I think when we do that, and we've already seen this, we get surprised by the amazing things that come from unexpected places. And I really believe in that. So there's almost a sort of internal venture kind of model around that. So I don't believe in like building a center of excellence and everything goes through that. On the other hand, the other end of that polarity that I see is that I saw someone produce a sort of really interesting visualization of this. Essentially, what it was is kind of putting engineering capability on one axis and design taste and capability on the other axis, and then different places on the four box quadrant of where sort of people end up. And naturally, what you have is this kind of unicorn at the top that is brilliant on both things. And I think you could actually sort of have like ability to build stuff and domain expertise, right? So it could actually be sales or legal or finance or customer success or tech support, many other things, and the ability to build. But the thing I think is going to change with this axis, it goes from being linear to logarithmic. So the people that are really in that top quadrant, they stretch away from the people that are just a little bit further back. And our industry's talked about 10x engineers for a long time, but the orders of magnitude by which these folks can deliver value, I think really extends away. And so the implication of that is that you might find, and this is just a theory at the moment, we're not doing this yet, but you might find that there are actually very small numbers of people inside organizations that have very outsized influence on how the organization runs.
Right.
So it's almost like this, the core within, and that's quite interesting to explore what the implications of that are.
You made me think of something which is really important, which is, these influencers that are sprinkled in the organization, you say kind of help with the direction or influence the direction of how the company works or is going and so forth. And I think when you think about AI and how employees are using AI, and it's also very similar, it's sprinkled around the organization. Everybody is using it differently. Like, how do you have you done this before? Which is, how do you get employees to kind of row in the same direction? And do you even want that? Like, do you want experimentation? How do you know where the experimentation is? I'm trying to think about, like, how do you get the entire organization really on one ship, on like how we're using the technology, where we're using it, where the priorities are, how not to use it. Like that I feel like is a big part of actually moving towards ROI, right?
Yeah, I think the it's another sort of polarity. You want uh, innovation everywhere, and you don't want chaos. So
Right.
how do you achieve those two things? And naturally, the easiest way to have no chaos is that you have everything sort of rules based and permissions and gates and this and that and the other, and then you don't really get much innovation. So the polarity, I think, is obvious. I heard this term recently called harness engineering, and I hadn't heard it before, um, but it's been a useful mental model for me. So I kind of imagine like the agents, like 50 horses running in front of a carriage, and then the harness is that lightweight engineering across the top that tells them, this direction, that direction, stop, that kind of thing. Um, and so this you have to I have a feeling that you want to build a kind of lightweight harness across the organization. That so for example, you could build a skill that would allow for every um, app or piece of software or agent that someone has built to sort of report on itself to some higher plane of organization and say, I exist and this is what I exist to do. And these are my inputs and outputs. And then some higher harness level could aggregate all of these proofs of signs of life and inputs and outputs and then communicate back and say, well, did you know that actually there are three other things that have the same purpose in life as you do? You should get together with them and learn from each other and perhaps incorporate the very best ideas from each into, but then amalgamate, right? Maybe we don't need all three of those. Um, and th- all of that could be agents. Like you can have layers of these agents actually doing this almost now. So the humans could potentially be innovating by saying, well, like my needs aren't met at the moment. So I'm going to build something that meet my needs, but then I'm going to submit it into this system, and the system will then say, "Oh, that's interesting. Well, we do have five other things that do that thing, but clearly your needs weren't met. So we're gonna incorporate that as part of the whole." And so I I think that's how you probably end up with a balance of like innovation at the edge, where it has to happen and it has to happen quickly because there are unmet needs, and some degree of central intelligence, obviously regulation standards, security, privacy, all of those things that are required. And you avoid total chaos, but you want some creative destruction. You want some, of that too.
Yeah. And people need to know where to go and what's possible. And I think that it's interesting. I think I think about what you just said and what the skills are that are going to be needed for the future. I think multitasking is maybe one of them.
Yes.
Someone who can handle multiple or juggle multiple, activities at the same time. I feel like that is going to be a big deal. And not everybody can do that. Well, I mean, maybe you have specialists, but even specialists should be able to do a little bit of juggling. And like, what does this mean for the future of our talent and the skill sets that people need to be creative, like you said? And that can be somewhat difficult when you have maybe grown up looking at engineering, zeros and ones, and now you're asking me to be creative. That's a lot of, I think, ambiguity for like the future of our young talent. What would be your advice?
I think my advice, and Jensen said this on that podcast, and I've heard it from other people on Reddit and blogs, is to immediately download the tools and start using them like today, because and I've now seen this enough times that I know for sure that this is a repeatable pattern. People start intimidated, they then play, and they either give up or they have a wow moment. Something happens where they go, holy moly, I can't believe I just did that. And that moment lights a fire. And I at the weekend, I had friends over and I was sort of talking about this with them. And the following night, the Sunday evening, I started to get WhatsApps from one of my friends. And he said that he had just been getting late night WhatsApp from his colleague who said, I downloaded it this afternoon. And in the last 6 hours, I've built this, this, and this. We need to roll this out immediately. And he said, I guess this is what you mean by the wow moment. I was like, that's it. And I think that's another, for what it's worth, advice for leaders is to help people in your organization get to their wow moment as fast as possible, and you need to get to your own wow moment as fast as possible. So that would be one thing I'd say to folks. And I think regardless of your profession, this is true. And clearly there are going to be some professions that are more profoundly impacted and more quickly than others. And the uncertainty I talked about earlier is very, very real. But the very best thing that any of us can do, whether it's for ourselves, for our colleagues, or for our kids, is to help them start to use these tools and get to that moment. And it is surfing a wave, but you got to get on the wave.
It's like an addiction. It really is. I mean, I've had my wow moment, I will admit, and it's quite addictive. And I can see why, people are just falling asleep with their laptops on their chest or on their nightstand. I mean, that's pretty much where not laptops live nowadays at night. And I'm not surprised. And it's refreshing to hear that even yourself as a CEO are going through these moments. I think it's reassuring to hear that a lot of people are too. And if you haven't yet, now is the time. So
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. I think you can go on Twitter and you can be easily intimidated by people talking about the extraordinary things they're doing. But the best thing to do is download any of these tools. I use Claude. I think it's awesome, but other tools exist, and just have your own conversation with it. Ask it, what should we work on together? And treat it like a colleague, and you'll be amazed.
that's the $1,000,000 question. Well, Georg, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to go code later today. So maybe I will share my own experience with you too.
Awesome. Thank you.
Visit us at LeaderbookAI. Your support as a subscriber means the world to us. So thank you for tuning in. I'm Felicia Shakiba. Let's connect on LinkedIn.